Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's your old captain coming to you live from Crooked Creek. Back in the canoe this morning. Got her tied down with some stick ups around me, so maybe we won't go away. Thank you for joining us. Today is a special day. Today is January the 6th, 2025. And you think, well, what's special about that? Well, I'll tell you what's so special about that. Today is my brother Dan's birthday. Danny is 78 years old today, and he has been an example, and he has been an encourager, and he is and was one of my first childhood heroes. Now, is he perfect? Heck no. I'm not even talking about the years that he picked on me and made fun of his little brother, but you forget about all that stuff. You know, that's history. It's where you end that counts, not where you begin. So happy birthday, Dan. Love you, dear. This morning we found ourselves blowing all over the creek. We found ourselves actually in back in the book of Exodus, and as we look at the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt, and later they're passing through the Red Sea, we begin to see a pattern. You know, these people had seen God send 10 plagues to the Egyptians. They had seen and experienced and walked through the Red Sea on dry, let me repeat that, dry land. But you would think that once they saw all those miracles that they would think, this God of ours is God, and he is worthy of our trust. He is worthy of everything that he says. We can trust him. Well, it seems like every time they got in a tight, they reverted back, and they started to complain. They started to bellyache and started to doubt. In Exodus chapter 14, 10 and 11, be patient with me this morning. Exodus 14:10 says, the setting is they're right at the verge of the Red Sea. Pharaoh and his armies are approaching, and they get uptight, they get scared. It says, when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? So all of a sudden, rather than the former rejoicing of being brought out of Egypt, now they're bellyaching. Well, you know the story. Hopefully you do. You can read it in Exodus 15. God parted the water. The Israelites went through on dry land. The Egyptians came right after them. God closed the sea and drowned them all. And it said that you could just see chariots and dead people all along the beach. And that was a miracle. Well, no sooner had they got out of that situation, 2 or 3 days into the wilderness, they started complaining again. In chapter 16, verse 3, it says, then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the children of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in Egypt, where we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They said, man, we were better off back there in slavery. Man, we had a pot of food, we had bread to the full, and here you've pulled us out of that into this God-forsaken land. Whew. Well, I just don't know about those Israelites. They just didn't get it. Um, you would think that they would realize the same God who had sent the plagues and delivered them out of Egypt, the same God who had split the Red Sea so that they could come on dry land, could provide water. He could provide food. He could do the things that they needed. I don't know if you ever listened to Skip Hedsick or not, but Skip is a pastor in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he's wonderful. If you will, sometime Google Skip, S-K-I-P, Hedsick, H-E-I-T-Z-I-G. I love his teaching. But Skip says that we often forget things that we should remember, and we often remember things that we should forget. And he's saying those Israelites should have looked back and remembered that God who delivered them and applied it toward this next obstacle, applied it toward the next obstacle. And there's things that we remember that we got no business remembering. If we've been forgiven of stuff, there's no point in wearing that out. That's history. We don't remember. We need to remember what we need to remember and forget what we need to forget. Well, think about it. If you were God, what would you do with these people? I know a lot of people say, I'll tell you what, if I was God, I know what I'd do. Well, Moses got frustrated with them because he would say, Lord, they're fussing at us, but the target is you. They're upset with you. They want to know why you've left them. Well, what could God have done? He could have fried them on the spot. He could have just annihilated the whole lot of them, but he didn't. Moses was upset because he just got frustrated. He said, I'm doing the best I can, and they just keep complaining, keep belly aching. How did God react? Well, the Bible teaches us that God is long-suffering. He's patient. He's slow to anger, and he is a God of grace. Now you say, well, I've heard about that song, Amazing Grace. I've maybe experienced some without really understanding it. Well, what exactly is grace? Well, grace, simply put, is unmerited favor. We didn't get what we deserved. Instead, we got God's grace. When they were complaining about no water, God told Moses, come down here, take your rod, strike this rock, and water will come out. When they complained about no food, he said, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have certain restrictions, certain regulations, but every day food will be provided. Quail in the evening, manna in the morning. And you have to follow the instructions. For 40 years, folks, that was their sustenance, because God was gracious to them. God was gracious to them. You know, you look back on your own life, and I look back on mine, and God has shown his grace time and time again. And sometimes we look back and remember, and we say, you know, God can take care of this. He helped me way back when. He got me through such and such. But no, we need to remember those times, and we need to forget about that other mess, because his grace is amazing. And you might think, well, there's the song, Amazing Grace. I said, nope, not today. Today, our song is Grace Greater Than Our Sin. Grace Greater Than Our Sin. This song was written by Julia H. Johnston, who lived from 1849 to 1919, 3 verses. And in Romans 5:20, it alludes to the fact where sin abounded, grace increased all the more. I'm going to read the first verse. It says, marvelous grace of our loving Lord grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt. Yonder on Calvary's Mount outpoured, there where the blood of the Lamb was spilled. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. 3 verses. Marvelous grace of our loving Lord, grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt, yonder on Calvary's mount outpoured, there where the blood of the Lamb was spilled. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. All our sin, folks, not just a few of them. Dark is a stain that we cannot hide. What can avail to wash it away? Look, there is flowing a crimson tide. Whiter than snow you may be today. Grace, grace, infinite grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Marvelous grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. Marvelous, infinite, matchless grace, freely bestowed on all who believe, all who are longing to see his face. Will you this moment his grace receive? Marvelous grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Marvelous grace, infinite grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. As we look toward this new year, many people make resolutions, but if we resolve to do anything, I want us to do what Skip Hedzik suggested. We need to forget the things we need to forget, and we need to remember the things that we need to remember. God never changes. God's faithful. He can't change because of his nature. He is long-suffering. He is slow to anger. And folks, he is the most wonderful thing in the world. I hope you have been a recipient of God's amazing, marvelous grace. Well, thank you for coming by, and this is our first session of 2025. I hope you'll share it with someone else. Hope you'll become a regular, and I just appreciate you stopping by for this week's Crooked Creek Hymn of the Week. You take care, and God bless.